Welcome back to Gale Force Winds Season 4.
The Gale Force Winds podcast is proudly sponsored by the Newfoundland and Labrador Construction Association. The NLCA provides unparalleled opportunities for its members through industry education, construction information, government advocacy, and networking events. The NLCA is building Newfoundland and Labrador. For more information, visit nlca.ca.
Well, hello, folks. This is a very special episode of Gale Force Winds. I'm actually on vacation, but I couldn't resist actually doing an interview when I found out that the person sitting next to me is from St. John's, and he owns a coffee shop, and he's been involved in the communications business for many, many years. I am not going to tread on his introduction to himself, but I'm going to ask John Reid to introduce himself. John, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, Jerry, I am from St. John's, at least from a school and work perspective. I grew up in Gander and worked in the telecommunications industry for 30 years. Left Canada, Newfoundland in 2005 and worked my way through the Caribbean and Latin America and landed in South Florida until I decided to retire about 6 years ago and venture into this particular industry.
So, there's a lot to unpack there, but let me ask you this. Your retirement lasted how long?
As long as it took to build this out. Really, about 3 months, the business plan was starting to be developed. So I guess you could say it lasted a couple of years only because we couldn't open the doors until then, till we built it out. But, you know, a lot of preparation work, I guess.
So your idea of retirement was to retire by opening up another business.
Yeah, and I guess even though I told people I was retiring, it was just a nice way to exit a company when you felt it was time to leave. And so I kind of had this concept in my head for 4 or 5 years, and yeah, I wanted to get at it. Got permission, I guess, from my better half to get back into things, and then focus on some of my family members and started this venture together.
Well, John, I'm going to say this is beautiful. We'll delve into Bynx, B-Y-N-X, and what it all means in a minute, but let's go back to your childhood in Gander.
Yeah.
Were there any influences that brought you into the world of business, or is this something that just happened to you?
That's a great question. I think I could look at one great family in Gander that we spoke of before, and Harry Steele, and EPA, and the hotels, and knew the boys growing up, and I think I always was amazed at entrepreneurs. My father-in-law was a successful businessman and entrepreneur and put everything on the line at times, and I thought that took a lot of guts. So I think with me, I look around the people that I had a chance to work for, Brendan Paddock, my good friend, and John Risley, and these guys, they see opportunities, they're not afraid to take risks, and this just felt like the right risk for me.
It's interesting, you grew up in Gander, you're surrounded by entrepreneurs, and it's interesting. There's an entrepreneur who opens up a store, and then there's Harry Steele.
Yeah.
I mean,
at both ends of it.
Prior to his passing, when they sold out, I think they had 100 radio stations.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting to me, Harry Steele, who I met many times, very motivational individual,
yes,
wasn't he?
Yeah, very well, and also just a very interested person in what you were doing. Like Harry was always, when I would run into him, and my mom and dad knew him very well. My father was priest in Gander, Anglican minister, so he knew everybody. And my mom was very heavily involved in the community. But Harry, every time I ran into him over the years, he always wanted to know what I was doing. He always asked about my parents, but he knew where I was, he knew what my job was. But Harry was always interested in how things were going, and I always felt that was a special trait that not too many very successful businessmen have.
Just want to make a note. A friend of mine one time said, "Jerry, why do you continue to look at your phone?" I'm not looking at my emails. I'm actually monitoring the process technically of the audio and all that. So just wanted to make that point. Growing up in Gander and seeing those entrepreneurs, and I guess the airport was still pretty active at that time.
It was, and also the Canadian Forces base, of course. And they were integrated well within the community. But yeah, the airport was, and the airport was open on the international side, and of course it just reopened a couple of years ago, I think, in terms of more of a museum now. But It was an interesting place, and we had the opportunity to meet many people coming through Gander, obviously. Sunday dinner at our place would largely be our family and often Cuban refugees.
Really?
Yep. And so, we just had a different perspective, I think, growing up. It was the community, the business leaders, the airport, the Canadian Forces Base, and how all that worked in a very small town of 10,000.
Yeah. Well, John, so you are in school, and did business in school enter your head at all? I know
No.
I'm beating this topic to death,
that's
but
okay.
I'm fascinated by the I guess the foundation of an individual like yourself.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting in Gander that when I graduated high school and left, I knew I wasn't going back. And it wasn't because I hated my town. I had a great youth. Played hockey for, my entire time there. My father was the minister, great friends, good school system. But I kind of knew when I finished that was it. I knew that whatever I was supposed to do wasn't going to be in Gander. And again, I have a lot of great friends there. I go back there every year, but I just knew for me it was going to be somewhere else. I think it was probably less business than it was probably on broader leadership. I was involved in school activities. I was the vice president of the Gander Youth Council, and then of course when I got to Memorial, I became involved heavily with the student council. So I think for me, it was more about the exposure I had through all my social and community involvement activities that exposed me to some opportunities that might, put me in a position to do something a little bit different, I guess, down the road. But again, at the right time. And that is, I look at myself as a quasi-entrepreneur in the sense that I did it when I had kind of accomplished some other objectives and was probably in a better position to do so.
Right.
I'm more amazed at those individuals who take risks when they're doing it by their bootstraps and, they are facing to the wind, and the risks that they take always amaze me. And, you always take risks, you invest a lot of your time and financial resources and everything else. But at the same time, I think for me, I kind of planned it more than some do. And I think, again, that's why I kind of call myself a quasi-entrepreneur with a certain risk profile.
You'll laugh at this. I used to call myself a semipreneur, not an entrepreneur, because I always worked for someone else in business development, but I had a wedding video production company on the side. So I said, no, I'm not an entrepreneur, I'm a semipreneur.
That's exactly right.
And morph into now, here I am.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying. At the age of 57, soon to be 58, the risk profile is not as great.
Yeah.
I have some resources that I can stretch out over time.
Right.
That being said, it's still,
It is.
I'm going to just look at the place. I mean, this is incredible what you've put together here. Tell us a little bit about that, and then I'll back up to your time, in the communications business. Because this is such a beautiful place.
I appreciate that. Well, we did hire a great design company locally here in Orlando. My wife worked closely with them, as I did, but really it was more, her involvement and influence. We decided to build this out in this location downtown. We wanted to be part of the downtown fabric. So it is a coffee bar, it's a recording studio, some other things as well. But it's also, as one customer told me last week, which is always good to hear, it's a community hub for artists and artistic expression. So we have a lot going on in this space, and our own activities or private events that lends itself to contributing to the community. And I was always, you asked me before if I was a musician just before this, and I said, no, I'm a great guy at buying guitars. But a lot of my friends are musicians.
Yeah.
Barry Canning, Fabian James, Alan Doe, all these guys, my son, they're all great musicians, and that's their passion. And for me, I always tried to either support them in some way professionally through sponsorship and advertising support or whatever. Or selling their CDs in some cases. So I think for us, it just, when we built this out, the concept of doing a lot of community outreach as well was a part of the reason that we built this business. There is the expression you give and you can get, but sometimes it's just nice to give as well. So, that's definitely part of our mantra here.
Well, I've got a camera running back there because I want to show this angle, but I just want to describe to people, we're actually sitting on a stage that's dedicated for performers, I would imagine.
It is, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about, your dedication to the performing community.
Sure. Well, we have everything here, the typical kind of cafe, coffee bar setup would have. We would have our have our open mic nights. But in this particular part of the world, we have a group that comes on, an organization that does hip hop and rap on Wednesday nights. We have Latino open mic night. We have musician showcases. We have songwriter circles, but we also have visual artists as well through painting. Then we would have your typical trivia night, comedy night. I mean, literally, I guess everything that you can think of in terms of artistic expression, we would showcase here. We have quarterly, we have an art bazaar where small vendors come in and set up their wares, so it's jewelry and whatever else that they would make themselves. So I think, for us, it's important to represent as many artists as we can in this community, and so we get a lot of people knocking on our door, and the calendar tends to be constantly filling up. But I think at this point it's a wide selection, so that it gives us that opportunity to support sort of the marginal as well as sort of the mainstream. That's what I would say, kind of music performers in the local scene.
It's interesting, being a musician myself, the juxtaposition between business and arts has always fascinated me. Yeah. And I think artists need a lot of help on the business side of things. Right?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Do any of the artists, do they come to you and ask you questions about the business side of it at all?
Actually, they do. I've had a couple in the last 3 to 4 months. One in particular, I remember it was like an in-depth conversation, and sort of, what to expect when starting my own business. What should I focus on? I think everybody sees what can be, and there are a lot of pitfalls along the way. And listen, I will tell you, be very straight with you, that running a company like I did, or working in big organizations and corporations, gives you broad experience. It's the grinder back there.
Obviously in a coffee shop.
But I will tell you that it's a humbling experience as well, because you're learning. I was learning, for the first time. I always used to say, I'm good at buying stuff. I'm not really great at selling. So none in the family, like my wife, myself, my son and my daughter, the two that live here, that sort of work here, we had no experience running a coffee business. We didn't own a record store. We didn't sell first edition collectible books. My son is a musician and then is a recording engineer as well by education, but we didn't own our own, and we didn't operate a recording studio. So everything we've really done for the first time, and you make a lot of mistakes. And so giving advice to people is not just about, 75% of businesses will fail after their first 5 months because of no resources or something, whatever the stats are. There is that, to be financially secure and make sure that you are conservative and you plan well, but you can really you can't plan for everything, and you have to be humble, and you have to recognize that sometimes you might have a long-term vision, but how you get there changes, and you had to be adaptive and make changes along the way to get to that end goal. And sometimes the end goal also changes marginally, but really the vision tends to stay the same as to what I want to accomplish, what an entrepreneur wants to accomplish, what this young musician wants to accomplish, in 5 to 10 years. Where do we want to go to? And so that road is really straight. And I think that's the best advice I can give. And also just to be strong and resilient, but to plan as best you can, and don't fret, don't worry when things go off the rails a little bit. As long as you can bring it back on and sort of keep going. Sometimes just keeping going sometimes is the most you can do at a certain point in time.
And what year did you open Bynx?
We opened on December the 4th, 2020. So as I like to say, we're a COVID baby.
December, so COVID was raging.
Yes, it was.
And you opened, so in
full
Florida.
Yeah, well, it was open in Florida.
Was there a mask mandate here then? Or?
There was not a mask mandate at that time. I just recall our staff wearing them and a lot of our customers wearing them. Oh, we mandated it. We were kind of looking at our peers in the food services industry and Starbucks and what are they doing? And we were passing out free masks here for all customers had to wear masks for several months, and our staff decided to wear them probably for another 6 or 8 months after sort of things settled down. So it seems like a long time ago now, but yes, it was full mask for us, but it wasn't required from a business perspective. We just decided to.
So you opened in December 2020. The actual first, I don't know if you needed to nails or whatever, the first bit of work that went into this place.
Yeah.
or let's I guess it's not even work. The thought process of this
Yeah.
and the signing of the lease would have been much advanced. Prior to COVID hitting, would it be?
Signed the lease in. We started looking at properties in the fall of 19, and we signed the lease in March of 2020. So about 8 or 10 months, 6 or 8 months before we opened.
Jesus, Mary and Joseph.
Yeah.
Haven't heard that in a while. So you opened, the entire concept of this and the signing of the lease was right as COVID was raging.
Yeah, and it was interesting because a friend of mine from my industry on the technical services side, so we would have been his customer. He's got some family here, and he pops in, and he reminded me, and I didn't realize it, but when he first came here, probably about 2 years ago, I was talking a little bit about the business, but he said, "You don't remember, but he said, you told me about this concept about 5 years before you opened, and I didn't realize I had been talking about it that long." So the thought process of what this would look like, although it changed again with my son James doing his degree in recording engineering and opening the studio, that was an add-on piece. My concept was really the cafe, the bookstore, the record store, the stage, sort of a different version, as it were. It just added another segment as James sort of took his path.
So you have records, you have books.
Yes.
Vintage books, you say?
Yes, I like to say we have everything from Hemingway's to Slash's autobiography, So,
interesting.
Yeah.
And of course, James has a recording studio.
Yes.
So he's recording individual musicians, bands.
Groups as well, yes, singles and multi-genre. He's done everything from country to rap to, pop and and it's that opened up about 6 months after the cafe. It just we had some work to do there on just sound containment, and so that took about 6 or 8 months. And again, it took a little while to get sort of the wheels moving there, but it's becoming an important part of our business, and James is really busy, which makes me happy.
Listen, I'm extremely fascinated by audio in particular.
Yeah.
My background's in video. Audio is the most challenging part of any production. So tell us a little bit about the studio, and James is not with us because he's out of the state right now. But tell us a little bit about that, and I guess you've probably geeking out a little bit on some of it too, are you?
A little bit, but let me just tell you again the mistakes you make.
Yeah.
This one we caught early. So my design was, in the back here you'll see this mirror.
Yep.
That was all going to be glass because the studio was right behind that. So I thought what would be really cool is that while there's some work going on, there are customers in the cafe can kind of see that and be part of the experience. And so we had it all designed and spec'd out, and then we hired a firm out of Los Angeles, basically take us through the end in terms of all the soundproofing, all the equipment we needed, and so they hired a consultant as a part of that. And the first thing the consultant said when he looked at the drawings was, "Who designed that with the glass?" So obviously sound doesn't work really well with a lot of glass, and unless it's really tight, it just doesn't, right?
Yeah,
So anyway, that was scrapped. So that was my contribution to the recording studio.
Because I agree with you. I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah, it sounds really cool, but again, the naivety and again, my experience and expertise is not in the recording studio, but it's a great space. We did receive, as I did every other part of the business, one thing you do and you take away from a corporate experience is you hire people to help you that are experts. So we went to coffee school in Portland, Oregon, but we hired obviously an HR consultant, which we still have on sort of retainer. We hired a chef to design our menu. I had mentors in the book collecting and the record collecting industry in Canada and the US, and so leaning on the experts to build this business was critical. So for the studio, obviously, we had to find credible partners, which were in LA, and an extension and a consultant somewhere in California. But we call it a project recording studio. It's a decent sized space, but obviously it can put a full band in there, and we have, but it's certainly not much room after that. But James is focusing primarily at this point on small groups, individual performances, and at the same time he's going to move more into the monetization of songwriting, which he has about 250 songs and beats and all that. And
he has 250 songs,
but not recorded. He's probably 15 or 20 recorded that you can find, but he has it all. So he wants to expand, obviously, the primary recording, focus to songwriting, monetization, creating beats for different industries and commercials and like. It's a very lucrative industry in itself. So we're trying to take that space and sort of do more with it than just primary sort of artist recording.
Well, let's, as you're talking, I'm thinking, like, this is a wonderful podcast area, and I've got two cameras going, but I want to show this angle here, because I have a concept in St. John's of podcasting from a windowed place where people can walk by, and I just think, because you said there's been podcasts in the coffee shop.
Yeah, we used that.
Right?
Actually interesting. It was the year before last. We ran it for about a year, and it was coffee and music. So there was a jazz musician that used to host, and we had a coffee expert, and they sort of developed the content based on their shared experiences. And so it went, we recorded it every 2 weeks in this particular location on the stage.
Well, maybe, if it's okay with you, I've talked to some snowbirds that spend time down here, and I really think that would be a great kind of people like yourself live down here from Newfoundland. If we could rotate a few of them through sometime in the future.
Well, some of them do pop over here. Again, as I mentioned, Jerry, living in Orlando, you see everybody. This is a place in the U.S. that people just tend to come. A friend of mine from Cornbrook just landed in St. Pete's last week. He's coming over next week. So it's a close enough location. Most of the Newfoundlanders and I guess a lot of the Eastern Canadians end up on the Gulf Coast. Not as many on the Atlantic side, and certainly not down into Miami, Fort Lauderdale area. Not as many, except for French Canadians are all down there. But apart from that, most people end up just over in the Tampa, St. Pete, Clearwater area.
You laugh at this. So I got two boys, as you know. You've met one of them. One of them's here in Orlando with us. I always say when we're in, say, Tim Hortons or whatever, I said, look around. Look. There's two types of people in here. There's people with business meetings, and then there's retired people.
Yeah.
And I spent my whole career in coffee shops. And that's where I'm going to end my time, in coffee shop, because that's where you retire and hang out.
Well, I tell you,
it's such a social place, isn't it?
In the industry, it's called the third place, because you have, for most people now, you do your work. A lot of your work, you say, you probably do in coffee shops, or certainly your planning. But it's called the third place because most people, they have a home and they have a workplace, and their third place is their coffee spot, their social hangout. It probably used to be the bar, obviously, in our pub. Maybe the Brits would call it their third place is a pub, but it really is known as the third place because a lot of people work out of here and they congregate here. Starbucks really created that model. They provided the space. They provided free Wi-Fi and allow people to sort of a lot of real estate guys in St. John's were meeting at Starbucks on Cameron Road every time I would be going in there,
It's interesting, the Starbucks on Stavanger Drive, are you familiar with that?
I am.
So they just renovated, and it's kind of weird actually what they did. And so basically they've expanded the staff area and reduced the amount of space for people. So I'm thinking they want people to get in and get out.
Yeah, it could be.
So basically they've got a row along the side that everyone sits in a line, and there's no other tables.
Yeah,
and that was my favorite place to go, but I like the round table that you've got here. I don't know if you can see it, and you say, well, you can see this one. I like that from a work perspective, but I also, wouldn't just stay there for 4 hours and not buy. Not only that, I would go in and have clients coming through, and I'd buy them their coffee and whatever else they wanted. So, but I see your passion in your face. How proud does it make? Because all the other businesses that you had, you were involved in much larger operations.
Yeah.
What does this in particular mean to you?
It's funny. I loved my career. I loved my career in telecommunications, and I met a ton of great people, but the technology kept changing, and perhaps it might be a little stagnant now. There's 5G, but there's nothing really kind of sexy in our industry. And back in the day, I would be going to the gym and meeting buddies, and when TSN was just launching and things, so it was you always kind of you always felt part of the entertainment and sports kind of scenes, I guess, as it were, and so I loved it, working in Canada, right across the country, obviously the Caribbean, Latin America. So I've been very fortunate in terms of the number of people I've met and different cultures I've been able to work with. I've always kind of felt that there was something else for me to do that was more tied to the community. And I go back, you asked me about the Gander entrepreneur kind of, it was probably more just the community building, growing up in a family where your father is, and a priest in a small town, and your mother was named Citizen of the Year at one point while we lived there, and my broader involvement then, I guess, in, student politics and everything. It just gave me a purpose where I felt, as much as I love what I do, I kind of always felt that there was something that I needed to do that was a little bit more hands-on in terms of my contribution and my involvement in the community. And I'm not going to complain, but obviously the more success you have in a corporate world, the more you get removed from, the layers.
Yeah.
So here, you're at the top floor and the bottom floor at the same time. And
You were making sandwiches this morning?
Making sandwiches this morning, doing my food prep and helping out there. My daughter manages the cafe part of this business, and I come in a couple of times of the week and make sure things are going good. I come in a couple of times a week in that particular role.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of do it all. So I think, for me, it was more, I love what I do. I love what I did. I felt I accomplished some objectives, and at the same time, I felt there was something else that I needed to do. I think that's probably more the right answer. I needed to do something a little different, and I'm just fortunate that I can do it with some of my kids,
Well, I get where you're coming from, John. So just to back up a little bit, back to your telecommunications career, you were in the ground floor as that was being built.
Yeah.
So it was Brendan and John.
Yeah, and the owners, primary, and Michael Leachin, at that time, primary owners of the business, yeah.
So that was 30 years ago?
No, that was 2005. What is that, 18? 19 years ago. I'm excluding Canada because it's a different, it was a different group of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I went to so John and Brendan came to MUN and did a conversation around Columbus Communications, and John made a joke that he loaned Brendan $50 million on a handshake and turned it into billions. So he said it was a good handshake. But it's always fascinated me, them as entrepreneurs, it fascinated me. And you were right there in the epicenter. You were the chief executive officer at one point, or the chief operating officer?
I was in the Caribbean. I was president of all the cable operations, and then the company was sold, and then was sold again. And I guess my last position was CEO of the company. Yeah.
And you had how many people under you at that point?
7,000. Now I have 15. But and all the HR practitioners or leaders that are watching your podcast, they will tell you it doesn't matter how many employees you have. It's always the part of the business that requires most of the work.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is.
Yeah, we're doing some work with HR project partners and Jackie Bailey, and I'm learning a lot from them. HR was never my strong suit. Anyone who watches this would know that. I'm really good at business development, but HR was always a learned experience. I had to read a lot. Back to the business development side of things, you did work in business development yourself and sales.
Yeah, I did.
Talk a little bit about that, because as a guy who did that for 35 years, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about that.
No, I get it. Well, I started off my undergrad degree at MUN was English and political science because I wanted to be a journalist, and then I got involved with the student union and all the businesses, and I kind of changed gears. And my first job was hired by Danny Williams and Cable Atlantic as director of corporate communications. And then 6 months after that, I moved to corporate to run the West Coast business. I joined Brendan about 5 years after that at Persona Regional Cable Systems, and I started off as Director of Marketing and Sales for Newfoundland, and then Vice President of Marketing and Sales for the company Canada-wide, and then I became COO and Executive Vice President before we sold the company. But along the way, obviously, it was a lot of business development, which, there is a lot of hats to wear, obviously. Business development and, marketing communications is kind of tied together in many respects. And I'll tell you that even though it wasn't my primary focus when I moved to the Caribbean, it was a critical part of my job, because the business development from my angle was, besides obviously, running the company and ensuring, that we met our objectives, was my relationship with government leaders, with regulatory bodies, with industry peers. So the business development takes on a little different role depending on your position, but it's still a very significant part of anyone's responsibility that's in a corporate position.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. And I can only imagine, in my career, I was in, the low millions, but as the numbers grow, it's funny actually, when Brendan was inducted into the Hall of Fame, the Junior Achievement Hall of Fame in St. John's, he gave a speech, and I was there, and it was something else. He said, I believe it was Craig Dobbin that said to him, he said, Brendan,
it's all extra zeros. Doesn't mean it's just, if it's 10 million or 100 million, it's just zeros. It's the same amount of effort.
Yeah.
That being said, though, you were in the many multiples of millions, so you had a lot at stake down there, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. And, we very typical is this business is a startup. You talk about your own business in the sense of where you are in its development. And, in the early days of Columbus, we were in startup mode. And we were, because of the nature of the ownership group in terms of the hyper kind of risk profile and really wanted to build and buy assets, there were times when we had to run things lean, work with our financial partners, go through all those challenges that, regardless of the size of the company, most companies go through, whether you're in the small thousands or millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions. Most companies have to find a way to get through during challenging times, and often those challenging times tend to be financial. So we had our periods when things we kept pushing, but we had some great partners, financial partners, great owners, particularly John Risley, and took a lot of risk himself. That has been repaid, but at the same time, he took a lot of risk himself in terms of investing a significant amount of funding into Columbus Communications at that time to see us grow.
Fascinating. It's one thing to build a business in downtown St. John's, another thing to do what you guys did. Just absolutely blows me away, and it's exciting to sit at the table with you.
Thank you.
I know we've talked for half an hour before we hit record. We're almost a half an hour in. A couple more questions.
Sure.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask the name. I don't know if you can see it. Bynx, yes you can. B-Y-N-X. Where did it come from? And
there's an easy
why?
answer.
Yep.
So the way I've had a couple of small businesses, and what I've done before with all of our kids is, okay, we're going to start this enterprise. It could be boring, nothing like this. I need a name, and whoever gives us the best name, we kind of give them a little reward. So I started that process, but about 3 to 4 months in, we had about 125 names. I had all the URLs kind of matched up to see what was available. And we were still living in Miami, myself and my wife, and we came up here in Orlando, in Miami, yes. We came up here to Orlando one evening, went to dinner with the kids, and my daughter at the time would have been, I guess, around 20, 19. So Dad, I got the greatest name. I said, okay. So, Bynx. And I go, Bynx, it sounds like an IT company. But anyway, she said, it's a one syllable, easy to remember. But the history actually is that James's wife's, one of the animals they have is a cat, one of their pets. It's called Bynx, B-I-N-X. It's a tuxedo cat. It's named after a cat in her favorite movie, which was Hocus Pocus, which was like Bette Midler and kind of a, That's the simple answer. And, at that time, we had gone through various exercises to kind of narrow it down, and I bought a bunch of URLs, and I still have them actually, and I was kind of thinking I needed to bring all the different pieces of the business together. But then it dawned on me, Jerry, that you can build equity in any brand, right? If these guys 30 or 40 years ago sat down in a boardroom and said, oh, we got this great technology company, we're going to call it Google, most people would have just laughed them out of the room, right?
No.
And then there's Apple, which is, but the point is you can build equity in a brand if you put enough muscle behind it. So I look back now after 4 years, and the name just sort of, I don't think about the name by that time. It did take a couple of sangrias to convince me that, yeah, Bynx, we can do it. But I did like the one syllable. We did hire a local marketing agency to give us a look and the feel, which I liked. A little retro, a little, kind of more in the tune of what I wanted to see in the visualization of the company. But it really was my daughter, but my daughter-in-law's cat that it's named after. Just a different spelling.
It's interesting. I got to tell you the quick story around my own name. I've never liked the names of any businesses that I've made. The first business I had was the Video Success Shop, and I've told a story before, and I'll tell it again, and it's a terrible story, but I'll tell it anyway. A guy phoned me up one day, and he goes, Jerry, you the guy that does pornos? And I'm like, what? No. And he said, it's the Video Sex Shop, isn't it? The next day I changed the name to the Video Man Multimedia. Anyway, you understand why I don't know, I don't like telling the story, but I have to.
Absolutely.
So anyway, the Video Man Multimedia, but anyway, I never liked that name either because it's more about me, it's not about the customer.
Right.
So I love your name, Bynx. And then, of course, Gale Force Winds really works well.
Yeah, I love that.
So names, but the last thing I want to mention is that concept of bringing your kids in,
Yeah.
working in the newspaper business, we used to get these end rolls, and I would post on our wall portions of it, and we would write names. So I'd get my two boys to come up with brainstorming sessions, and I still have them folded over. And I'd say there's 200 names of different businesses on that. And I tell you, it is a real special memory.
Yeah.
Fast forward now to AI, you'll laugh at this. I've actually used AI for new business names, and it's frightening how cool. Like, you can ask for 100 names around a business, and it spits them out. It's brilliant, but the experience of having your children in a room dreaming about a business, so that's cool, John.
Appreciate
I really like that. Last thing I want to ask of you, and you've kind of alluded to this, but we always ask a question around advice.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of Newfoundlanders watch this, a lot of Atlantic Canadians, and it's, of course, you know, we've expanded around North America and the Caribbean and Europe. But what advice would you give to a business person, knowing that you had, you know, you're at the C-suite level in the communications industry, now you're behind the counter, you know, actually making sandwiches. Tell us a little bit about a bit of advice.
I think what has allowed me to have some level of success, and listen, I'm still trying to find it here in the big thing, the longer term play, obviously. You have to stay true to yourself. I always tell people, you know, your path could change, but your North Star should never change. Keep your feet on the ground, but at the same time, you know, be very humble, be very, you know, appreciative of the opportunities you have. But never change who you are, regardless of the environment. Whether you're speaking to, you know, a bunch of bankers on the 30th floor of the TD building in Toronto, or you're sitting down here on a you know, Tuesday night and you're participating in a trivia game, or you're hosting a Trivia Pursuit kind of a, you know, night at the shop. Just be who you are. I mean, I think people feel that they have to be something different or someone different depending on where they are in life, in their environment, in their job, in a situation, and you never do. If you always are who you are and you wear that authentically, good things tend to happen, especially if you're sincere. So I think that's the advice I give to people. I wouldn't give them advice on, you know, making sure you know, your balance sheet and your P&L looks good. I mean, that's all common sense. You know, work hard, absolutely. Hire good people, absolutely. That's kind of table stakes. But I think wherever you find yourself, just be who you are, be authentic. And I think, you know, life tends to work out pretty good for people who take that road.
Well, John, absolute pleasure. Look, you know, I, as I said, I'm on vacation.
But it's raining here today.
And, well, it's part of the reason why, you know, we've scheduled our vacation day around shopping and coming in to say hello to you as well. But I got to tell you, like, it's so humbling to sit here and listen to you talk. A young man from Gander who's downtown Orlando has had a lot of success in the telecommunications industry, and here he is now making sandwiches behind, you know, the counter. And you've put together one heck of a beautiful place. If you're in Orlando and you want to come to a coffee shop, this is a place to come, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you, John, for joining us.
Thanks, Jerry, for having me.
It's been a pleasure.
I can say the same. Enjoy your holiday.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Gale Force Winds. That's Gale Force Winds, WINS.com.